so suddenly the Chinese are in that whole maelstrom of politics. They presumably will try some things early on in their experience that are, many of us would say, were, are paths that we in the West have tried and rejected, ultimately as unsustainable. Well, the Chinese cannot just take our knowledge, so they're going to have to learn their own way. Africa is where a lot of this learning will take place. And it seems to me it's a fundamental U.S. interest for China to learn these lessons. Africa seems the place appointed by Providence for them to do it. And I don't see any great threat there to either U.S. economic or political interest. Now, the question that many people raise, and it's a serious one, is will the Chinese commercial concerns undermine the efforts of humanitarian NGOs and other groups in the West? And I think this is a problem. But again, I think this reflects realities, not some artificial action by the Chinese. And it's part of what we're all going to, this is part of the process by which China needs to become integrated into the international system. And China may find out what it's like to have your copper companies targeted by every boycotting, publicity-seeking, political wrangling NGO in the world. I say, great, let them learn. And let them come to realize, as Western interests rather belatedly have done, that it's much better to be proactive in these matters and to take a sensible, relatively enlightened approach from the start. It's in the long run, that's cheaper and more rational.
Yeah, because drawing an analogy with the soft and the hard power of Joe Nye, I'd say that is the hard and the soft integration of China, in the sense that if you think that straightening up institutions in Africa is the interest of the United States, then the commercial interests of China in Africa do not work in favor of American ambitions and American objectives. I'd say that the tribal, cultural, political, historical situation in Africa is so complicated that the circumscribed developments of church-to-church missions requiring others in Africa is a reality. It is something that is circumscribed. I don't see it having, it's debatable, but that of a major political consequence, at least in the foreseeable future, maybe later than that. I think more immediately and in the medium term is the competition of interests and the indifference of the Chinese because of where they come from and where Americans and other Westerners come from to the future of politics, states, and society in Africa. I think they may well respond to, and I totally also, as like you, take Zierik's approach to U.S.-China relations very seriously, the responsible stakeholder. I think the Chinese have shown that already to a decent measure. But I think if they may give out of, on some accounts, like international institutions, financial crisis, remember Asia in '97, right? They didn't do it again. More recently, and a number of other aspects, maybe tomorrow Iran, for instance. If they may give out to the Westerners and the Americans in particular what they expect as a tangible response to their integration as a responsible stakeholder, they might as well not respond on other accounts, such as Africa, and I guess there will be little response from the Westerners on that. So I see rather a murky future for Africans.
I think that would be a common view.
We're going to do one quick question, and we're close to adjourning at 2. Yes, ma'am. You have the last question.
My name is Shoshana Richards, and I go to Barnard College. I guess my question is twofold. I want to know why is it that the rise of the Asian voices is a threat to Europe's standing in the world? And if it is a threat, then wouldn't it be better for Europe to shift its attention from forming a relationship with America and probably focusing on a region like Africa, where it already has a history and it can kind of like renew the relations? Because I mean, when I think of George W. Bush putting
I wouldn't say necessarily that the rise of Asia is a threat to Europe, but I think politics, it's about survival. And when I mentioned that I don't believe in the clash of civilizations, in fact, public leaders in Europe do not buy the argument. In fact, they should finance think tanks, like a Spain, for instance, to come out with new ideas and new paradigms. I think we're facing a clash of prosperity. Prosperity means, sustaining your own society, protecting it, and that's what it is about. That is to say, the struggle for survival for society. So they have to adapt. In that sense, I wouldn't say it is an immediate threat or threat at all. It's just there is a global rebalancing act, and the Europeans have to take stock and make what it takes and think about what it takes in order to adapt themselves to, in many ways, education, investments, international relations and treaties, for instance, welcoming these countries, that goes back to the G8 issue, into the playing, just like Zidek said it, playing the responsible stakeholder card with them and come up with a strategy for them. That's point number one. Point number two about Africa, the point is we're running out of money. I mean, just like the US is overextended domestically, we are the same. In fact, Western, in that sense, Japan is included, industrial societies are just facing the same issues. Demographics is the underlying beast, if you wish, that is never mentioned, but that is critical to the future. And therefore, as far as I can tell from a French perspective, the point is lots of criticism on the ancient ways of dealing with Africa, good or bad. I think the responsibilities are shared, and two, we're running out of money, so you have to have priorities and reorder your priorities.
Why not? I think all parts of the world, all countries need to think about how do they handle their relationships in a world where the Atlantic is no longer the center of world politics. And it certainly means that Europeans, as Yannick said, need to think more about Europe's approach to Asia and to Africa. I'm not sure that Europe would find the past a particularly pleasant way to build on its relations with Africa, in the sense that whether it's the colonial regimes before the 1960s or some of the other relationships that have existed since then, there's been at least as much bitter as sweet from an African standpoint there. And it's not clear that the countries that enjoy the closest relationships with Europe have the most prosperity or the best governance in Africa. Perhaps especially in Francophone Africa, though certainly not exclusively. So it's a complicated question, but it's probably true. I think underlying Yannick's point is that there's going to be less discretionary money in the foreign policies of all the countries. And it's going to be, for development money, as you pointed out, many of Bush's initiatives haven't worked. Unfortunately, the truth is that ever since World War II, most of the development money that's gone to Africa has utterly failed to generate anything worthwhile. And the Cold War gave sort of a reason for giving money to Mobutu, even though he was going to be promoting democracy and development in Switzerland rather than in Zaire with the money. And Swiss democracy is flourishing, I'm happy to say. But now it's going to be more difficult, and Africa and its partners are going to have to find new rationales and new ways of moving forward. But I do think that there is an interest, a continuing commitment in the U.S., I can't speak for Europe, on trying to find a way to make things work better.
We are at the hour of adjournment, and I want to thank our two speakers who have just been really superb. Excuse me, I want to thank all of you for coming, and on behalf of the Maison Française and the French American Foundation, I know they join in thanking you. There's lots to be continued. Those of you who are students in your classes, I hope you will take this information and continue to talk about it. It's been great to have all of you here. Thank you, and we are adjourned.